Namaste. And we welcome you today on the 12th day of February 2022 to our series, Savitri is the Message, with our beloved Alok. And we are on page 540 in the Book of Yoga. Her body's thoughts climbed from her conscious limbs and carried their yearnings to its mystic crown, where nature's murmurs meet the ineffable. But for the mortal prisoned in outward mind, all must present their passports at its door. Disguised, they must don the official cap and mask, or pass as manufacturers of the brain. Unknown their secret truth and hidden source. Only to the inner mind they speak direct, put on a body and assume a voice. Their passage seen, their message heard and known, their birthplace and their natal mark revealed, and stand confessed to an immortal sight, our nature's messengers to the witness soul. Very powerful passage.
So, Savitri has, the background is that Savitri has received the command, annul thyself so that only God may be. Annul thyself that only God may be.
Yeah. Yes.
So, how does one go about this process? So, the Gita describes, Sri Aurobindo has spoken about it, stand back from the machinery of nature. So, when we learn to stand back from the machinery of nature, initially it's some part of the mind which stands back, not necessarily the deeper inner being or the soul. But that's okay, one starts with that, and if one is not to stay stuck there, as some forms of meditation, one can stay stuck there and even mistake this subtle ego born out of the higher layers of the mind as the soul. But one stands back, then one becomes a student of oneself. There is a very interesting word in the Gita, swadhyaya, a student of oneself. That's how it's translated. It's not about reading a book, but a student of oneself. So Savitri has become a student of oneself.
Is it tantamount to the witness soul?
Yes, absolutely. It tantamounts to the witness soul through this process. In the beginning, it is the higher parts of the mind which observe. So, as we begin to witness, then Savitri is describing the entire machinery. So, what we read is a description that on one side, when she stands away, she observes how these thoughts are coming sailing from the higher realm, because she has already arrived at the awakening of the Kundalini and the chakras. That's there in Canto 5.
Yes.
So initially in this canto, there is a description of again those centers which open up, and she can distinguish where is what coming from. Mother would often decide based on that in a particular music, a certain note, or when a person speaks a certain word, a certain kind of speech, she could sense it in a particular chakra as a kind of vibration, and she knew where it is coming from, the source. She didn't have to listen or have a scholarly, okay, you are saying something very nice based on XYZ. She could see it from where it is coming. So she has become a student of oneself, and she sees, very interesting, her body's thoughts climbed from her conscious limbs and carried their yearnings to its mystic crown. So normally, see this passage which is described from below upward is from the spine. But she is describing from the very limbs. Everything is conscious. So the entire passage from below and from above, because before this there is a description as the thoughts come sailing from above. Where we read, I'll just read a couple of lines. In the previous page, there is a seeing will pondered between the brows, thoughts, glistening angels stood behind the brain, in flashing armor, folding hands of prayer, and poured heaven's rays into the earthly form. This is the actual description of thought standing behind the brain and then entering the brain. See, there is a very interesting conversation of the mother in one of her talks, evening talks. She says people often think that people ask questions and she answered. That's ignorance. She was the one who was putting in the questions. And she at one place, there is an interesting humorous aside to it, which Taradi told me. Most of the questions she used to ask, 75%. So one day her father told her, "Are you the only foolish girl in this whole thing that you have to keep asking questions?" It was in Punjabi, so I must, for those who may have the original humor. तू इकल्ली एक मूर्ख लड़की है जो पूछती रहती है बाकी सब nobody else asks, you are the only one who asks. He says, what shall I do? And then later on, mother describes that she used to send these questions in the form of she describes it like a blue light, like a plane, those paper planes, and they would enter the head and the person would ask a question. The entire Gita is about that. There is this Arjuna watch and Krishna watch is two ways of looking at the fact that both are Krishna watch. He brings out from Arjuna those things which are hidden inside because he doesn't want it to come up in the middle of the war. That's how Sri Aurobindo describes it as the action of the Vaishnavi Maya. So, but very few people were asking questions. So you'll see that very interestingly, maybe sadly, 58, 59, then mother stopped going to the playground for question answer session. And people were, why has he stopped? So Taradi went and asked, there in growing up with the mother, exact words I may not remember. And she asked, why did you, mother, why have you stopped the class? It was so nice. She said, who is there to listen? These are her words.
She would often say that to them. She said, you're all asleep.
Who is there to listen? So what is the point of taking classes? And then Taradi had tears in her eyes because she had never expected like that. Then she's asked, Mother, can I bring, some questions and you'll reply. So that's how, many of these thoughts and aphorisms were done while she was in her room. So this is the whole story that she puts the questions and then she answers them. So this is what she is seeing, that how thoughts are coming and entering the brain. This is a very important aspect because very often in medical science or neurologists, they believe erroneously that brain generates thoughts. Now, how can brain, which is a activity of neurons which are unconscious, how can it generate thoughts which are conscious and climb up to be a sage thought or a seer thought? So, from the spiritual point of view, brain is just an instrument. Like computer is an instrument. Supposing somebody says computer is generating thoughts. We'll say, oh, you don't know how the computer works. It's foolish. What do you mean? I see the thoughts coming. I see the sentences coming up on computer. Well, there is a man sitting out there who is typing out. So the same way the brain is just an instrument, and that explains one of the challenges of the yoga. Until the brain itself becomes supple to receive the different impacts, when these thoughts enter the brain, they will take a narrow form. So here he describes that, she describes, they don the official mask. This is what we'll read now. So when these thoughts come, but for the mortal prisoned in outward mind. So these thoughts are standing back and they are knocking at the door of the brain.
But that's us. Speaking of us.
Mortal mind is us. So, may I come in? May I come in? So then what happens? All must present their passports at its door. What is the passport? Reason. So then, when intuition comes, it must take a rational form. Otherwise, it's very difficult for the human mind to accept it. So, of course, this passport and entry of thoughts, official, acceptable things which we find acceptable, this is very common. And it's one of the things going on in the whole world without knowing. Things will present themselves in very acceptable ways. Because our human consciousness will not accept certain things, at least a developed consciousness. So what happens? The human mind tends to give a justifying reason for whatever thought it experiences. That's how people do. Sometimes people use worst kind of justification, which is spiritual justification. The Gita says you can kill anybody in a state of detached. There is another kind where, somebody says something to someone and both are sadhaks, and if the person reacts, so he says, aren't you supposed to practice equanimity? Now this is one of the grossest misuses. You practice equanimity. You can't hit somebody and say you practice equanimity. But all the time this is how it happens, that they have to wear an acceptable mask. That acceptable mask is reason for human beings who have developed to a certain point. Below that, it's all animal play. Animals don't have to justify themselves. But human beings have an innate necessity of justifying their actions. They have to refer it to the buddhi. So very beautifully Sri Aurobindo describes it that in the beginning, when buddhi begins to appear, buddhi is what actually distinguishes, if you look at it carefully, a human animal from a human being. Otherwise, people are just driven by desires, instincts, impulses, fancies. But buddhi is the sign that it's a humanity. So things need to be referred to buddhi. But in the beginning, buddhi is very new entrant. So it is used by the vital and the animal mind to justify itself. It uses buddhi, hires it. So everything is justified by the buddhi. After some time, it's like it's too young a child. So after some time, buddhi says enough of it. Like a child, when the child grows up, says, no, I have my own say. So the buddhi begins to tell us what is to be done and what is not to be done. And this is a proviso till the soul steps into the front. Then it's a different story altogether. So here is describing when when the thoughts enter into Savitri's brain, they must wear an official cap. This is how in mortal mind, not in Savitri's brain, but what happens to us. When they enter, if we don't find a reason for it, then we don't accept it. So most of the time, intuition comes and takes this form to be acceptable. So here is the description. But for the mortal prisoned in outward mind, all must present their passports at its door. Now, someone was saying there is no humor in Savitri. There is so much humor in Savitri. Look at this line. Passport. Thoughts are coming and saying, where are you coming? Rational, stamped, coming. Otherwise, the human mind will shut itself out. Disguised, they must don the official cap and mask. Official cap and mask is the reason. Rational, mask. So then they are allowed entry, otherwise you are not allowed. No mask, no entry. You may say, I am a devotee. Devotee has no meaning. Mask. Yeah. Without mask, vaccination certificate, you are not allowed. So this is how official cap and mask or pass as manufacturers of the brain. If sometimes it is like you don't receive it like that. But I think. Manufacturers of the brain. Now if I think, that's how I think. Then you don't have to have any reason or anything. I think that is enough. Who is this I? It's like generated in the brain. But no, it is coming from several sources. Thoughts are circulating in this world like desires. So what happens with desire? That you go to a market, you have gone with a friend, not really planning to buy something, and suddenly you end up, okay, let me also buy, or you have gone to buy one thing and you end up buying 5 things. Why? Because desires are circulating. Market is the hub of desires. Similarly, there are thoughts which are circulating. So we pick up and catch, and that is the reason why it is so important to have the atmosphere of people around us who have beautiful thoughts. Let us be in the company of such people. Now, we don't find such company, and obviously when people are around, it's not only thought but vital and everything which comes in. So in the company of good books. Why? Because then these thoughts create an atmosphere and we can receive. Because thoughts are like that, they will enter. That's why satsang, all these things where They used to be one of the ways of life, earlier. But now, of course, it's like anybody and anywhere.
I have a friend who said, the problem with Orville is opinions.
It's a cosmic world problem. Everybody has an opinion. Opinion is fine. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a right to their opinion. And they want to decide by discussing opinions, which is actually an impossibility. Opinions are like that.
Probably 3,000 now in Orville.
Any number. No, behind the 3,000 there'll be 30. Because, always when we had seen during that, the book controversy. So what happened is that the matter within the ashram was very simple. About 90%, 95% people.
I would agree.
Your letter was one of the first ones. I count you as, were against the book, very clearly. 5% were non-committal and some odd things were going on. Suddenly letters started coming from all over the world. People who had read, not read, including historians like Mr. Guha, who is a complete leftist historian, they started writing letters. And then, these letters were circulating all over as if they are equally valid opinion. This was the worst misuse of democracy ever seen. Some people are saying this, some people are saying that. That's how it ended up. That there are different opinions. So some are saying this, but then there are others who like it and who are saying this. Whether they understand or not, it took pains for me to tell them that these people who are saying, have they really read Mother and Sri Aurobindo, their biographies, what are the credentials, but viewpoints. So opinions are like that. In Thoughts and Aphorism, the mother describes how these opinions are like these little things which are all around. So how to reconcile? Either you have to have somebody with a vision of truth. That was the whole idea of, let's say, a master in an ashram. He decides and people accept it because it's a vision of truth. When you don't have the vision of truth, the way to take a decision is refer back to what is the ideal, the highest ideal, and then follow that. But there comes the revolting mind. No, democracy, it's my view versus your view. And that's how the world, there is a writing of the mother in Conversation in Agenda, which I may just, since we are talking about it.
Yes.
She said, the days of democracy are over. She doesn't talk of coming of dictatorship, but she speaks about people, just 3 or 4 or 8, who have the truth vision. They should govern the world and govern the place. In Orville context, she says. And then she describes a very interesting experience where Sri Aurobindo is playing with a ball. Just imagine, Sri Aurobindo playing with a ball. And the ball has become very worn out. And then he tells the mother, can you get me another ball? And the mother says that ball is democracy. It has outlived its purpose. Something else has to come. What that is, we may not know. No, she describes there that 4 to 8 people who have the understanding of truth, and she describes what will be their sign. She says that they will be white, plastic, compassionate, desireless, detached from things. They have no personal stakes involved, no personal interest involved in whatever they are doing. She describes all this. And then when they say, obviously they will also command that. Because, when you see a man like that, people listen. But if they see that you are another person like everybody else, nobody is really much bothered. So she describes that how democracy, and several places she laughs. She says it's like a large number of people who cannot understand and think, they decide what the world would be like.
And she speaks of...
She uses a word which, idiotic. I don't know.
She speaks of a divine anarchy that would be the best.
That is subsequent. That is the last...
Subsequent, exactly.
Yes, the world starts with the anarchy of the indeterminate, and it will lead to the anarchy of the supreme determinate, when everybody lives according to the law of truth. But in the middle, the passage, there have to be people who govern this world, and because otherwise, how do you go forward? So this is the path, and all this is very clearly laid down in her writings. There is no ambiguity. But not reading is a bad habit. We read everything except Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So that's, I mean, anyways, so put on a body and assume a voice. Okay. Or pass as manufacturers of the brain, unknown their secret truth and hidden source. It looks like a very rational thought, but actually its source is somewhere else. We reason out, we may give justifications or even explanations. Not necessarily justification, but actually the impulsion may be coming from truth. At one place, the mother says something similar takes place between will and desire. She says, I can see the deformation. She says, if I plant a will in a particular person, go and say this to X. So it's a will which has gone inside. The person has to go and say, because he's moved by the divine will. He says, but the person, when he receives it inside, he doesn't know it is the divine will. He feels an urge to say something. And that urge he mixes with his own desires. Should I say? Should I not say? Reason comes in. So in the end, he deforms that will. He communicates, but it is a deformed will. And one example of that was when that story, many of us know, but it's worth, because how a yogi acts is very difficult to understand. So there was this rich lady who stopped in a car. She was in a car and the driver stopped there and said, can I just go inside and come back? The driver was a local person who had faith in Mother and Sri Aurobindo, just wanted to go there. And so this lady is sitting behind and she remained in the car and Udarda was passing by. So Udarda felt like telling her, it's said in the Bible that it's easier to make a camel pass through the to the eye of a needle than to make a rich man turn to God. But he said, oh my God, how can I say this? This is I don't even know her. So he went inside. Very proudly he tells Mother, today I practiced equanimity. I had this urge to tell, but I restrained myself. She said, but I was the one who had put this thought inside you. Had you uttered this, her life may have changed. She may have stepped down and gone inside that what is this? It would have given a shock to her outer mind. So that's why we see in Sri Aurobindo has used a very unique way to give this shock to the mind. See, there are many books which are where he has written, bringing it down to still a logical structure. In the higher mind, you have logical structures. Beyond it, it's like intuition. There are many writings which are completely intuitional. But in books like The Synthesis and The Life Divine, you feel that he is arguing from a logical point of view. People use the word arguing. I just don't understand why they use the word. Whom is he arguing with? But anyways, what he is doing is he is using that intuition through a rational structure he is releasing because he knows that's how human beings will receive it. Otherwise, he could say it just as that. And then people would read and then they will further argue and discuss and debate. So he has used a very different way with thoughts and aphorisms. And the mother says thoughts and aphorisms are like they just pierce through. They give a shock to the mind. So you don't receive it by reason. So your mind gets into a topsy-turvy state. One of them which, that people who don't understand, they will say that Rama the avatar murdered Vali. But to the person who can see, he knows that, it is a justified act. It doesn't give any justification there. But when you read it, of course, for some of us who are aware of the whole thing, but to an other mind, it can completely be shocking that what is he trying to say? And there are many, many aphorisms like that, which one of the best ways to open the mind to higher truths is through thoughts and aphorisms. Mother said that this was a moment when he was transiting into the supermind. So he has used this because when you go into the supermind, the entire vision changes. And some of the mother's answers, when someone asked about Rama, that it is said that he walked into the river, isn't it like a self-harm or suicide? She says, whatever the avatar does is correct. It is done with a divine consciousness at the end of the story. She doesn't And this is logical. If he is divine, whatever he has done carries the stamp of the divine. But to the rational mind, it's not understandable, not acceptable. So we see all these, so one of the best ways to shake us out of this prison of the mortal mind, once again, is thoughts and aphorisms. And of course, Savitri is ultimate.
Well, Sri Aurobindo also says I read a lot of him on thoughts, and he says that none of our thoughts are our own.
Yeah.
They're all coming in from these waves in the universe. And he says one will accept the thought, another one will refuse it. The genius will accept something that he thinks is fantastic, another one will say no. But he says at the end, the one who says, now I've got it, he says, ego, sir, ego.
Absolutely. There are several such examples where he has given about these thoughts entering thought mastery. One of the practical things which I'm sure many must have experienced is to step back before speech. If you want to understand thought, you'll see the thought is coming like this, pushing you to speak, troglodytes of the mind. And it looks very innocuous. Cave
dweller.
Cave dwellers is there in Savitri. That how the troglodytes of the hidden minds from the subconscious, they will climb up, and you are on the verge of uttering, and you catch it. Where is it going to lead? And you stop it there. So with speech, this practice becomes very easy. Next step is thoughts, where she speaks about observing your thoughts in Dhammapada. Those who want to know about mastery of thought, Dhammapada is a wonderful book. And the last one which she read during her evening classes, because she felt the necessity of this. She said, we are not yet at thought mastery, forget about the higher truth. So the last conversations are the Dhammapada, though they come in volume 3, but actually they are not done during 29. They are the last conversations, 58, 59. Yeah. That don't ask me the why. Just humorously. When somebody was coming to the ashram, his wife was not well aware about what it is. She knew, she had faith, but this man had been brought up here. So she said, Acha, I'm all fine with it, but tell me anything specific that I must know. He said, number 1, don't ask any questions, don't try to understand anything. Number 2, it was a humorous way of saying that with the human mind you won't understand. It's so true. Because the Divine Mother's creation. So don't ask me why it is put along with Conversations, volume 3. But you can check it. It is Dhammapada is a teaching given at the end. So they come, pass as manufacturers or pass as manufacturers of the brain, unknown their secret truth and hidden source. So these thoughts are coming from different levels. Right from the superconscious to the cosmic consciousness, from all around, from the subconscious they are arising. And one has to observe them. Their passage seen,
only
unknown their secret truth and hidden source, only to the inner mind they speak direct. So if one is stepping back and beginning to live in the inner being and the inner mind, one can catch these thoughts. It is one of the practices through which one can actually enter into the inner mind. Put on a body and assume a voice. So before thought, we take it as language. We say that. But look at it, it's very interesting. Different people speak different languages. How does thought come? So what we call as a language or word is actually a garb it must put on. And if you enter into the domain where thought is born, you don't need the language. Mother once, when she was going on a walk with Amrita, one old lady suddenly caught her and started saying everything in Tamil and crying and almost catching her feet. And mother for half an hour heard her, then whatever mother said, she didn't say in Tamil. But whatever, she was very satisfied and went away. And then Amrita said, Mother, you know Tamil? She said, no, I don't need to know Tamil. Because you can get those vibrations which are being clothed in words. And that's why if people want to avoid fight, don't discuss, don't debate, don't catch thoughts and said, you said this and you didn't say this.
I don't know if I said this
just
before.
Just feel the vibrations inside.
This was a story that Pushpa Patel told me. That they went to a go-down that had lumber, and they wanted to find logs to make new furniture for Sri Aurobindo. So Mother went in with them, and they chose all the logs. And you know this story?
But you say it is beautiful. Yeah.
Okay. And and then they went out and they got in the car. And Mother goes back inside. And they're calling her, Mother, and Mother, come, we're ready to go. And then she walks out and she says, there was one log that was calling to me and said, please use me for Sri Aurobindo's furniture. Wow.
And perhaps for people who may not be aware, there were furniture, some pieces of furniture on which Mother's gaze had fell. And I remember once I needed a bed for someone from ashram department, I'm saying. So the person pointed out that this bed is special. I said, in which way? Mother has seen this bed. So there are such wonderful stories which are, So, put on a body and assume a voice. So thought is not about words and speech, that is much later. That's why in Indian thought you'll see that there are 4 levels at which speech comes. And that's why very often when the word is used with a capital W, Shabd, people think it is a language word. The word is the vibration. That's why with the word this creation is born. The supreme vibration. It comes down, it gets modified. Finally it takes the form of speech. And before that, sound. In animals, it's only sound. With human beings, it's speech. And it clothes itself into whatever is suitable. It enters and sees whatever language is there in the brain. Conditioning picks it up and enters. Their passage seen, their message heard and known, their birthplace and their natal mark revealed, and stand confessed to an immortal's sight, are nature's messengers to the witness soul. So it's only when one steps back, lives in the inner mind, that you can see where are they coming from. Otherwise they will look very innocuous. Very often they will say it's a small little thing, it's just a thought. What is there? Thought can build worlds. There is a sentence in Essays on the Gita which had shaken me when long back I had read. He speaks about thought that fathers this world. Thought. That is the power of thought. And people who don't understand it feel, say, in today's state, what is there? Books, again, the freedom of things. Books, what is it? Each one's viewpoint. It has created so much confusion. Of course, humanity has to go through it. And yet people still don't understand the difference that this thought has come from another dimension altogether. So they are not all same. In 2 little stories, because it's very interesting. One was when in Delhi center, Sri Aurobindo Society Center, I had walked in to look for Sri Aurobindo's works. They had a library. And you'll be surprised, they were all put casually. 3 volumes of Sri Aurobindo, Rajneesh, then somebody else. I was so surprised. So I started taking out all these trash books, I would say, put them below, clean the place quietly, because otherwise you're not allowed to do anything. The official people will do it. Another story which is even more interesting, someone just told me, a 14-year-old boy in Kerala, and he told me the story that how he turned towards Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So his brother first turned, and he said he was like, most people like that time and that area, atheist, and what is all this, and it's too big and all. So the brother came, probably attended a camp or something, and then went back. So this boy, he says he wanted some now to read some books of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So he goes to a local village library, and he asks them that, do you have Sri Aurobindo's, I want to see some books. He said, no, you go to the city. We have a small library. We don't have all these books. So he says, I can't go to the city. Okay, anyways, let me explore what I can find. He is drawn to a cupboard, broken. The glass door is broken. The cobwebs are around, and there he sees Sri Aurobindo's books. And when he was describing 14-year-old boy, I was so much shaken. And he said, I was so thrilled. The books were calling him. I said, that must have been. He said, yes, the books were calling me. That's how he enters the library. And despite the librarian telling him that no, there is no such thing, he somehow enters and reaches there. And then, he picked up, and that's how the life changed. So we must understand how these things happen. That's how Sri Aurobindo is revealing to us. It comes from different sources. It's a vibration which clothes itself, comes down, enters the brain. Depending upon our language, our development, it takes on the official mask, and then it enters and touches the brain, and then it takes the form of speech and thought as we understand it or experience it. So the yogin who has learned to step back, lives in the inner mind, can understand this whole process, can see where is it coming from. Impenetrable, withheld from mortal sense, the inner chambers of the spirit's house disclose to her their happenings and their guests. Eyes look through crevices in the invisible wall. This invisible wall is the fence of nature within which we are caught. That's why people say we can't think beyond a point. Why? Because there is a fence. So if you try to think, you cannot. So one of the best way to break open the fence or neatly open the fence is by reading Sri Aurobindo. It opens after some time. So it can open on the lower end also. If one reads trash, junk, you don't know where it will open. So once this fence is actually guards us against the Titan and the gods. That is the other part. The average normal humanity, so-called. So it says that I can't understand these hi-fi things. Why? Because nature is not allowing this. This fence will not allow it. You have to open the fence. So it is like cart before the horse. So people don't read Sri Aurobindo because they say, I cannot understand. Not realizing if you read, you will understand because this fence has to open. That is the whole catch. And that is the experience of people, and Sri Aurobindo's advice that if you read after some time, depending on the preparation, this fence opens. So here she is seeing, disclosed to her their happenings and their guests, what's happening inside. Eyes look through crevices in the invisible wall. And this what's happening inside is the most fascinating thing if we don't start indulging in it in an egoistic way. I read once something very interesting. Sri Aurobindo says, someone asked him that if one is traveling in a train, what does one do? Passengers are discussing, all these things are happening. It is a perfect, beautiful time to observe human nature. Just imagine. To observe human nature. So much you can learn just by observing. And then you observe yourself. What are the responses arising within each one? Most often we don't know. We just react. So, self-observation. And through the secrecy of unseen doors, there came into mind's little frontal room. Then we say, my thought. That's where the ego. That's why with regard to books and these things, Mother says, I don't believe in intellectual property. Yes. writes about books.
Copyrights and
Copyright,
things,
she has,
yes,
that
she was
is written
against it.
clearly.
Yes.
She doesn't believe in copyrights. That a different story. There are human beings who believe in it. Because of the Sri Aurobindo's, when he is physically present, and I believe in saying all these things very honestly. I've said in proper talks also, Radhakrishnan, he copy pasted, plagiarized. And this was told to Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo said it's okay as long as these thoughts are going to do good. Discovery of India, Nehru's. I was reading and I saw two passages. I said, this letter is on yoga. And one of the passages is half on religion something, because he has to prove a point. And it's not, he has not even acknowledged this is Sri Aurobindo. That's the worst thing. So I wrote a letter all the way to the ashram. The time Harikant Bhai was there. I said this, I quoted the passage and I quoted letters on yoga, giving myself a pat on the back. Or they'll say, oh, so wonderful. I got such an insipid reply that after that I thought, what is the point? Because, the party was in power and whatever it must have been. It was like nobody is really interested in doing anything further. So I said, ye kya hai? Clearly, passages too, I have seen, maybe more, I don't know.
Well, now we have Ken Wilber.
Oh,
And he says,
yeah.
I have copyrighted the integral yoga. You cannot use it anymore in the ashram.
He should know there are two others who have done it before him.
Yes.
Divine Life, copyrighted.
Yes.
I didn't want. He is a great man. So I didn't want to name him. See, it is not his fault. See, that's what I'm saying. There are human beings whom you can talk. He's a great yogi, without a doubt about it. He is a great yogi, a genuine, authentic yogi. But followers are followers. What do you do if they... Yeah. So copyright means you can't use that word. If you use it, you have to pay royalty. That's what it means. So copyright always has within it, of course, the ego aspect, and the other is the, money aspect. I had started writing these articles in Namaha in the beginning. So we didn't have sufficient people to write. So they said, who will write? So I said, okay, I'll write. So how many you'll write? I said, I'll write 4 or 5. So how can it go? I said, no, I will write pseudonyms. They said, but it won't be correct. I said, why? Amal Kiran wrote like that for Mother India, so it's perfectly fine. So since then, for quite some time, even now moving forward, that doesn't have any name. So I said, what is the point of putting a name there? Anybody can use anything. It doesn't matter. So they said, no, the name is not for, don't think about recognition and all that. But if you don't put a name and there is a problem, whose neck will be available for the news? I said, then it's okay. Since then, otherwise it was very clear.
Yeah.
Whose ideas are they anyways? Ideas don't belong to anybody. Even the body doesn't belong to you. Leave aside ideas. It belongs to the divine. And that's a basic thing that I believe that human beings, even a dignified human being, not even a yogi, need to understand that ideas don't belong to anyone. Anybody can use them. And if they misuse it, their problem. People have asked me that you are just telling them you use. What happens if somebody misuses it? I said, that's his problem, not mine. People have misused all kinds of things in the world. So this is nothing. So here she describes that how one can see how they come and they enter the mind's little frontal room. What a description. Thoughts that enlarge our limited human range. Why? Because they are coming from elsewhere. Now suddenly they open up the passages, lifted the ideals, half quenched or sinking torch, or peered through the finite at the infinite. So what were these thoughts doing? Coming from higher ranges. Suddenly they entered the little frontal room where people are. This is it. The limits of mortal understanding. And suddenly they touched and made the finite look at the infinite, gave a glimpse, awakened the seeking. That's why the mother says, if you don't understand Sri Aurobindo, that's not a problem. Not reading Sri Aurobindo is a problem. It shows complete intellectual lethargy, tamas or whatever else. At least for those who are turned towards Mother and Sri Aurobindo and want to follow the path, I don't see a logic why one shouldn't read. I understand general masses, people don't want to read, it's their issue. But if you want to follow the path, read. Now, why? People say, I don't understand. Doesn't matter. She says, be quiet, read it. Read a little at a time. The words will create new brain cells for the understanding if necessary. So I feel not reading Sri Aurobindo is a kind of insincerity or rather a lethargy, just tamas. Even if one passage doesn't matter, not that one has to read a whole book in one go. Read a little passage here, there, somewhere, but
Sometimes she says 1 or 2 pages of Savitri is enough.
oh, that's the more than enough.
I think so also.
And to add to this, one of the things which I used to practice is to write the passages which used to strike. And I had my own logic about it. The logic was, later on I came to know that in Indian thought it's called as Lipi Yoga. But I didn't know about this. So the logic was that, see, what is happening? When you are reading, your eyes are receiving. If you are reading aloud, your ears are receiving. So two most important faculties are seeing and hearing. Then it is going into the brain, and I know which centers they are going. Eyes are going right behind, and the hearing it is going to the sides. And then it will go to the integrative section of the brain. If you are holding the book, your touch also is involved. And then, now it will not only stay there, now a response has to come all the way through the neurological centers, into the nerves, into your hands and right. So it forms a full circuit. So I just love this idea of, now of course we have computers and all this, and that was a phase when I would start the day before starting seeing patients, put on Sunil Das music for 10 minutes, then read something from Savitri, something from the synthesis, then start writing. So I was very happy when I came here. I can do all this. My first contact was, do the work, don't do all this. So I said, okay, those happy days are gone there. In Air Force I could do it. 15 minutes, nobody to tell me, quiet, just Sunil Das music, and put this, and so wonderful. Read and write. So last few lines we'll read. A sight opened upon the invisible. That's how the inner sight begins to open. A sight opened upon the invisible, and sensed the shapes that mortal eyes see not, the sounds that mortal listening cannot hear, the blissful sweetness of the intangible's touch, the objects that to us are empty air, are there the stuff of daily experience and the common pabulum of sense and thought. So, in that inner mind and the inner domains, your sight opens up, your hearing opens, touch, sense. That's how people feel the divine presence. We'll close here, but before that, what the mother said about this. Last conversation in 1959 or 58, that book, where she says, but this is the last class. She says human beings believe that only what they can touch, what they can see, what they can hear with these senses is real. They are actually prisoners. And as long as you are in that stage, there is no way you can take to the spiritual life. You have to understand that this is a prison. And it's logical that this is a prison. My sight and hearing is limited in terms of range. One has to be just an intermediate student to understand this. One should have had just read elementary physics and biology, that eyes pick up only this much, hearing picks up only this much, touch even less. These senses pick up so much more. Touch even less, because these are the only really developed senses. Nature has developed them over a period of time. They are closest to the brain, and all others are, different. And yet, if we think that is the only thing that tells us about reality and evidence, then she says one is in a prison and it's a long way to go.
Namaste.